Shalom Aleichem. This is a tribute to Rabbi Adin Steinzaltz, Rabbi Adin Evan Yisrael Olav Sholem. So Hab Malichtigen Gan Eden, who passed on this Friday. A few recollections and a few tidbits from various issues, reports over the years. Rabbi Steinzaltz was an Adam Gadol. He was, you would say, among the world Jewish leaders. And I say this not flippantly. I say this because he had a large and a very far vision. About 30 years ago or so, I was going to Eretz Yisrael on TWA when it still existed, flying from New York to Eretz Yisrael. And in business class was Rabbi Steinzaltz, and I believe he had some secretary who was with him on the plane. And I asked for permission to go in and talk with him, and I was given permission to go from coach class to business class, and we spoke for about an hour. It was a fascinating conversation, and one of the things that he told me was that if he had the funds, he would be able to disseminate Torah, Yiddishkeit, to non-Jews all over. And in particular, he spoke to me about his dream of having Pirkei Avos, Ethics of the Fathers, translated into Chinese, and spread it and disseminate it amongst the millions and millions of Chinese people. And it was clear that his vision was not just tunnel vision or short-term vision, but rather long-term vision. And I think we could say that with his translation of the Talmud, of the Gemara, it took him 45 years, single-handedly. You have to understand, there's a major difference between him translating the Talmud and ArtScroll. ArtScroll has an entire staff. In addition to the fact that ArtScroll is translating more in the traditional way for Lemdei Torah, serious students of Torah, and Rabbi Steinzaltz's translation is more for the sophisticated person if they want to know what species an animal's from, or where does this fish come from, and things like that. You know, you find that in the Steinzaltz Talmud. But besides that, ArtScroll has an entire staff, and Rabbi Steinzaltz was on his own. Only recently did Koran publishers take over the Steinzaltz Talmud, and they're helping and they're marketing it, but for most of the years, he was on his own. So one individual on his own, 45 years translates the Talmud, and that's amazing. And he didn't do it just for this generation, he did it for the future. So we now have this important piece of Torah for Jews worldwide, and lahavdil also non-Jews. So going back to that conversation on the airplane, he told me, kind of, not with a jealousy, but with if I just had access to funds like the Rebbe does, meaning to say that the Rebbe has so many supporters, Baruch Hashem, and there's never enough, but, you could do much more. He said, if I had that, I would be able to do so much more. So that was one fascinating insight into the person and his vision. In 1990, at 40 years since Yud Shvat 1990, he spoke in 770, and it's online. It's been, going around. And there too, he criticizes the crowd, the people, the Chabad Anash community. And his message is, wake up from your sleep, make your time, every moment valuable, and get working. And on one hand, it's like, here you have an opportunity to speak to so many people, and you're speaking to them, and you're being critical of them. I mean, that's kind of a sour message. But on the other hand, if you think about it, it was the right message. because 40 years is a milestone. Rabbi, The Chazal, the sages say, it's when you become mature, realizing that, what did my teacher really want, and am I doing it, and I better get started, So Steinzaltz left that message for the Lubavitchers, including Rabbi Mendel Futter, Rabbi David Raskin, and Rabbi Pinson, and then Rabbi Herschel Fogelman, all the people on the dais, and all the Hasidim in the crowd. He was telling him, get moving. And he lived this way, very unassuming. He lived this way. I recall seeing him walking. He was... you could tell it's Rabbi Steinzaltz through his blue shirt. He always wore, during the week, a blue shirt, not a white shirt, which is another telling feature about Rabbi Steinzaltz. He wasn't a conformist. He didn't conform to society, including Jewish society, Torah society, Hasidic society, Litvak society. And this is what people had sometimes an issue with, especially when the Bnei Brak element decided to attack him for his interpretation, his book with biblical images of the Ovis and the Mois, and it's a discussion for another time. But he thought out of the box. See, he was really a revolutionary, a very, very creative thinker, and, one-of-a-kind type of thinker. I was told that he, Nechama Leibowitz and Yeshaya Leibowitz and a few other geniuses would get together once a week or twice, once every 2 weeks, whatever, sometimes during the week or the month. And they would, 1, 2, 3 in the morning, they would get together and they would talk philosophy and science and Torah. And, it wasn't like we're going to solve the world's problems, but it was an opportunity for these geniuses to have a shmooze, on a level that makes them all, similar. So we speak about his being unique in the sense that he wasn't, per se a Chabadnik. Now this leads me to my next point, and as part of the tribute. How did he become a Lubavitcher? Who formed him? Because every person, when you look at them and you assess their life, and you want to walk away with a message that you could take in your life, you need to know their background. Rabbi Steinzaltz was raised in a non-religious family. At the age of 10, his father sent him to yeshiva, or Talmud Torah in Eretz Yisrael, where he was born, where they studied the Gemara. When he was a teenager, 17, 18 or so, in the mid-50s, he came to Lud, to the Lubavitch yeshiva, to Taim Chitmimim. My father, so Gesundsein, was there, and he remembers Steinzaltz coming. In speaking with several Hasidim, I was told that he didn't last very long in Lud. Reb Shlomo Chaim, the Kesselman, the famous mashpia, who really groomed many Bacharim, they who are Rabbonim and Shluchim and leaders in their own right, etc. But Rabbi Steinzaltz did not seem to find a comfort level with Reb Shlomo Chaim and his method. The details aren't relevant now, but it didn't go, and he was there a very brief time. And he left. And he went and he pursued basically a degree, and he became a very educated person. But at the same time, he also met and became a Talmud, a student of Rabbi Shmaryo Sasonkin, who lived for 25 years in Eretz Yisrael, in the Shchunas HaBukharim, I believe. Shchunas HaRabbonim it was called also, maybe it's an adjacent neighborhood over there in Yerushalayim. And he was able to respect him and learn from him. Another individual who had a big impact on him was Rabbi Shmuel Eliezer Halpern, who was the Rav of the shul, in the Lubavitch shul in Beis Yisrael section, which is adjacent to Meir Shorem. Now I want to tell you about these two people so you understand what took Steinzaltz and how he really became a Lubavitcher. Rabbi Sasonkin met the Rebbe, I believe, in Yaktinislav in 1918. I forget the exact year, but I found that Sasankin became kind of a chassid and really impressed with the Rebbe in Yaktrinislav when he was there for a while. This Rabbi Sasankin, was more of an intellectual type. The Reb Shlomo Chaim's style was a very different style, more of an emotional style, although he used a lot of, psychology and in shaping the students. Nevertheless, Sasankin was more of an intellectual. If you take a look at Sasankin's picture, you see him, looking up, I think with a cigarette, like he's, philosophizing. Rabbi Steinzaltz, because of his brain and his knowledge and his approach, related to that. And it brought him into Lubavitch. And the same with Rabbi Halpern. Rabbi Halpern I also knew. I spent with him several Fabrengas in the shul in Yerushalayim, and he was a big Talmud Chacham. I think he was also Rosh Yeshiva for a while at Teres Emes in the yeshiva. And he was very sharp, and he had tremendous hiskashrus to the Rebbe, which is interesting for a Yid who grew up over there in Yerushalayim, to come to a sensation, to a feeling of hiskashrus to the Rebbe. In fact, the Rebbe told several people to go to 3 Rechav Me'esharim. That was where he lived. I mean, it became an address. If you want to have kind of a connection and know about Lubavitch, go visit him and talk to him. And he had an impact on Steinzaltz. So these were the two Lubavitchers, and also Nachum Rabinovich, who was, I believe his name was Nachum. There was a Rabinovich, the Rabinovich family in Yerushalayim, that also had a great impact on Rabbi Steinzaltz. The result of all this was, when I visited him with a friend in the shul in the old city, the Tzemach Tzedek shul, he would daven barichas every Shabbos. He would stay a few hours afterwards and daven, with great intention and kavanah and focus. So what Reb Shlomo Chaim wanted, which was that every bocher and every yom gaman and every chassid should daven barichas, especially Shabbos, and focus on prayer and all that, was accomplished. But it took another style of a mashpia. And I think this is an important lesson for us today. Sometimes the mashpia that you have in yeshiva is not your style, and you can give it all up in the sense that the answer is no. The answer is, like the Rebbe said to some people when they went by for dollars, and they said, my mashpia told me this, and the Rebbe said, find yourself another mashpia. Well, how could that be? I have a mashpia. I say lechorav. If that's not the mashpia for you, find yourself another mashpia. And going back to Rabbi Steinzaltz, another few points is that he was very, very sharp, and he was cynical. Now, you could look at cynicism as a negative, or you could look at it as positive. He didn't have time to waste. His days were counted. I'm not talking about just the last 5 years since he became ill. I'm talking about, he knew he had a mission. And he knew that there's hundreds and thousands of Yidden that are not yet connected. And his goal was to teach and to share with Jews, befrat, specifically, especially, to get closer, to become, he would say, not let my people go, let my people know. That was his slogan, let my people know. What's better than a Jew? It's an educated Jew, kind of that mentality. And he lived this way. His cynicism was his forthrightness to a situation without beating around the bush. Just like he said at that Fabrengen in 1990, he said that, this American bluff, I heard that from my great uncle, Mendel Futterfass, who said the same thing to me about the American bluff. So Steinzaltz is Yerushalmi, and he has also that, that sharpness, that quickness and that honesty in a way that, come on, cut it out. Are you going to be determined by your white shirt or your blue shirt? It's what's behind the shirt. Now, of course, Shabbos, we wear, a white shirt. That's tradition. But if someone doesn't wear a white shirt, he can't be a chassid. He could be a chassid. And he can be his best, and he needs to, understand what's the reason for wearing white and on Shabbos, and slowly, he'll either come to it or he won't come to it. But he, for example, I believe one of the sons told me that he had opportunities to raise so much funds from Jews that belong to conservative or reform synagogues and temples. But when he would talk, he could lash it into them and say, like, how can you, omit sections of the prayer book? How can you break Shabbos, And he lost the support just by saying that. He didn't care. He did not care. Because if he felt the message needed to be said at that time, and again, that was his call, he said it. And if it meant that he did not going to give him the donation and the funding, so be it. And I think that's a tremendous virtue of a person, and l'tevis nishmasai, that his honesty and forthrightness, although sometimes it feels harsh and cynical and distant, but really under it, it's coming from a good place. So when we look at his life and we give a tribute to a person like Rabbi Steinzaltz, who left us, we need to understand that we're not all made the same. And yes, many people are, kind of nicer on the outside, and they sound better, and on the same video he says, I'm not a speaker, I never was a speaker, I never will be a speaker. It's the message. It's the message and the person behind it. Finally, about 17 years ago, I brought a friend to meet Rabbi Steinzaltz, and we were there Shabbos, and after davening, he went over to him, and he said that he learned a certain section in the Gemara, I think was in Tractate Sanhedrin, and it seemed to him to be a trivial matter, like not important. Why would the Gemara spend so much time on this, And I just stood at the side to listen to their conversation, and it was fascinating. He showed him how the dialogue in the Gemara wasn't about semantics, one ox goring another ox, but rather it was an entire ideology between two schools of thought and two sages, one coming from this perspective and one coming from that perspective. And I think when we talk about, his genius of the Talmud, and once in a lifetime, and, once in a century type of a scholar, it's all true. We need to understand that it's the seeing from the seemingly insignificant, unimportant, trivial pieces of Talmud, we see an entire ethos of not just scholarship, but way of life. And there's the perspective of A and the perspective of B. And then we dialogue about it. So the details of the Talmud, how to understand the particular section of Talmud you're studying, is much larger than just details. And this is something that I witnessed over there that Shabbos afternoon in the Tzemach Tzedek Shul. His book he called about the Rebbe, My Rebbe, which is also interesting. My Rebbe